My name is Heath Watson from Concentrus. In today's session, we're going to be looking at the differences between NetSuite's manufacturing modules. Now, the way that NetSuite kind of approaches the different manufacturing modules is that they kind of grow with your company, so to speak. So as you start out with the basic, the most simplest functionality within NetSuite for manufacturing, which is the assembly build, we can then add in a pre-posting or pre-building transaction known as a work order. Then from there, we can utilize the WIP or work in process module or functionality for the work order. And then lastly, advanced manufacturing module kind of extends the capabilities that WIP allowed us. So the nice thing is with any of these, as you'll see here on my next slide, is that you're not losing features as you transition to, we'll say, like a higher level of NetSuite manufacturing. So even at the very highest level, meaning you're utilizing all the functionality, even the advanced manufacturing functionality, you can still create simple assembly build records on the fly whenever you need to, and vice versa. You'll be able to utilize the basic version of the work order in addition to a more advanced WIP version of a work order when you're utilizing the work in process. So you don't have to worry that, hey, you lose, maybe in certain situations you like the simpler records lower down in the simpler modules, so to speak, but for 80% of the other transactions you're doing or operations you're doing on the shop floor, advanced manufacturing or WIP kind of fit the bill. The other nice thing about that is it's very common where companies will not jump in head first, so to speak, straight into advanced manufacturing. We'll start out at the, say, work order or WIP level if we know the type of information we want to track in NetSuite related to manufacturing. And then as we get familiar with that and we see, hey, these are working really well for us, but I'd like to kind of take it to the next level, add in some more functionality, then you can always, level up to work order, level up to WIP, level up to advanced manufacturing, etc. So perfect. So the agenda for today, most of it is going to be demo driven. So this is luckily actually my last slide. So what we're going to look at, as I kind of showed you in the previous slide, it does kind of like a build out functionality, meaning even at the very lowest level of the assembly build, you can still use that assembly build through any of the other three higher level modules, so to speak. So all you're doing is you're adding in new records, adding in new tools, but you don't lose the tools you had with the other modules. So we're going to kind of start out at the basic level with the assembly build. And then we'll look at the next level, which is utilizing the basic work order. And then we will look at the next level, which is the WIP version of a work order in the manufacturing routing. And then lastly, we'll finish off with the kind of highest level of manufacturing within NetSuite, which is advanced manufacturing and all of the records that are associated to advanced manufacturing specifically. All right, so let me hop over to my demo account here. Perfect. So we'll go ahead and start out with our assembly build record. Now, just a little bit of forewarning or a heads up, so to speak. So this demo account has kind of like a every feature on scenario. So you're going to see a lot of fields, a lot of different records today. By no means, try to not, write down every single note, so to speak. But keep in mind that all of the layout, the field placement, even a lot of the functionality, there's a lot of options on the background or on the back end, so to speak, to customize what you're going to see today to fit your specific business needs. So I might have examples of components or certain cost categories, labor codes, things like that, that might not exactly fit your business need. That's totally fine. Like I said, we can go ahead and customize. There's a lot of flexibility in building this around. Today's session is mostly just to show what are the core functionality, and then you can tailor that to fit, whatever your specific business needs are. And mostly today is to kind of help give you a good a good gauge too as well if you're kind of looking at adding in one of the NetSuite Advanced or one of the NetSuite manufacturing modules, where you kind of might fall in that spectrum, whether it's just assembly build, work order, WIP and routing, or work in process, and then advanced manufacturing. So hopefully that's the goal for today, is to kind of give you a feel of like, hey, we kind of fit in the WIP bucket, so to speak, or the work order bucket, or the advanced manufacturing bucket. So perfect. So at the very basic level, the first kind of simplest transaction we have for any manufacturing is going to be an assembly build. So what an assembly build basically does is, if you think of like our bill of materials, so these are in different industries call it different things. So a bill of materials is essentially a listing of components that are needing to be consumed in order to produce an item. So in this case, we have a listing here of our components, and that is rolling up to build the assembly or sub-assembly that we want to produce in this specific assembly build record. So the features for an assembly build are pretty straightforward, like I mentioned. When you pick the item that you want to produce, so in this case our assembly record right here, it will pull in the components from the bill of material associated to the assembly item automatically anyway. So you don't have to worry about like manually defining those or anything. You do have a lot of flexibility to adjust them on the fly if you need to. You can put in scrap. So for example, you can adjust the quantity if you needed to as you're producing the assembly build. But there isn't any planning component to an assembly build. There's not any kind of, we'll say, like non-posting or pre-building transaction, meaning as soon as you save the assembly build, it is immediately posted, meaning it's immediately going to hit your inventory, i.e. consuming these quantities of your components, and then incrementing or adding to the quantity of the assembly that you're producing in the location that you're producing it in. So there isn't any kind of like pre-planning transaction where you could, we'll say, schedule out your manufacturing, so to speak, and then build as kind of the schedule allows, so to speak. So this is very much a kind of a one and done transaction, and like I said, it's immediately posting as soon as you put it in. Now, again, like I mentioned earlier, don't get super caught up with all the fields and everything that you're seeing. Again, all the fields can be customized, the layout can be customized, tabs, etc. And there's a lot of fun things that we can do as far as customizing this to make sure you're capturing the right data at the right point in time, that kind of perspective. But foundationally, just kind of keep that in mind. The assembly build transaction is the simplest transaction for manufacturing in NetSuite, but it is immediately posting. So usually it's kind of like you're putting in the assembly build at the moment you're building or as soon as you finish building, so it's more like past tense, kind of recording in the system what you've been doing. The next transaction that we get in our kind of staging up, so to speak, of NetSuite modules is the work order transaction. So what the work order allows us to do is be that non-posting, be that planning transaction, so to speak. So in this example, what happens is if we just had, say, the work order level of manufacturing, our work order would be our non-posting, or we'll say like pre-posting transaction, where we could build our schedule. We kind of have levels of statuses of work order, meaning is it still in a planning status? Has it been released? Has it been, we'll say, be in process, meaning it's being worked on, so to speak. But it is kind of like it's that basically pre-planning transaction like I was telling you about. So what this allows you to do is you can have hundreds or thousands of work orders in the system, and then based off the components that are on that work order, kind of develop your own schedule and then rank them however you need to. Now, do keep in mind at this level, when we add into the WIP work order, you're going to see it kind of take into a whole nother level, a lot more features added in. So when I say scheduling here, it's very manual, right? There's not any time component to the basic work order that allows you to say, oh, well, it takes 5 minutes to do this step, an hour to do this step, that kind of a thing, and then do kind of like capacity planning. That all comes with the later modules within NetSuite. So think of this as it allows kind of planning, meaning simply by the act of it being a pre-posting or pre-building transaction, you can use that to help you build a schedule or ranking of work orders to build, so to speak. But there's not any like native out-of-the-box tool that's looking at time as much as far as scheduling. The last thing of note here with the work order is in this scenario with just the work order level of manufacturing, your posting transaction is the assembly build. So the transaction we just looked at before this. So basically what this allows is the pre-posting, so the work order, and then you use the assembly build to build your work order. So there is a relationship between your work orders and your assembly build now, rather than just having, say, like a standalone assembly build. You can have a work order, and then that work order turns into an assembly build, so to speak. So that's how you'd be able to distinguish between your work orders that are still released but haven't been built, and then those that have been, in this case, been built. Perfect. The next level of manufacturing capabilities within NetSuite is called WIP and routing, or sometimes just called manufacturing routing. What this allows us is a couple of pieces. So first off, we still have a work order. It still has the same kind of like statuses like I was talking about earlier, meaning it's in a plan status, it's in a release status. But here, we don't utilize the assembly build to complete a WIP version of a work order. We actually have discrete issuing of components and completions, where with the basic work order, you can't say, oh, I'm just issuing these 3 out of 4 components to the work order, and then I'll issue the other one later. It's basically a build everything scenario, meaning when you have that work order, you transition that to an assembly build. It builds everything all at once. With the WIP version of a work order, we can discretely issue our components to the work order and also discretely enter completions for the assembly of our work order. So say I have one work order for 100 units. I can say, hey, I've issued the components required to build 40 units, and I'm issuing the completion to build the 40 units. But the work order itself is still open because there's still other components required for it. There's still other finished assemblies required that are part of that work order. So it allows you that kind of timing flexibility to discretely issue those components or completions as needed, so to speak. The other piece of the WIP version of the work order is we now get access to the manufacturing routing record. So what the manufacturing routing record allows us to do, let me hop over to that real quick, is in addition to just managing our components, meaning what are the physical items that are going to be consumed in order to produce this assembly, it also allows us to record what are the steps, what are the we'll say people aspects, the labor time, so to speak, that we need to associate to produce this assembly item. So with the WIP version, we also get access to that as well. So let me hop over real quick and kind of show you. So we have a discrete transaction for a work order issue, like I mentioned, a discrete transaction for the completion, and this is also where we can record our time entries for our different operation steps as well. The nice thing with these separate transactions is it's not an all or nothing kind of a thing like with the work order and assembly build, meaning we can have one work order that has multiple issuing of components, multiple work order completions tagged to it or linked to it, so to speak. And then lastly, we have the work order close. So what the close does is it's not like you're saying the work order is done. So there's a separate status that indicates the work order has been fully built, and then there is a separate status for closing. So in this case, in this environment, we're utilizing standard costing. So the close in a standard costing perspective means this is where we get to calculate all of our variances. So usually the closing process is part of month-end close. It's very much driven by the accounting perspective. Your manufacturing team, they're just worrying about, making sure they logged their time, making sure they pulled all the components, recorded any scrap, and that they finished building the assemblies that were part of the work orders that they were working with. Usually then, like I mentioned at the end of the month, accounting is coming through and doing a closed work orders process utilizing this tool, or individually per work order if they want to. And here we're able to run this tool, and NetSuite will automatically calculate whatever the production variances were for the work orders that were produced at the time frame we're looking at. These variances can be driven off of price variances or quantity variances. So for example, if I had a work order building 100 units, and we'll just keep it super simple, say there's 2 components on the bill of materials for that assembly, and each one of those calls for 1 unit as well. So in theory, I'd have 100 assemblies I'm building, 100 of component A and 100 of component B. Super simple. If there was some scrap or overusage in there, so say I built the 100 assemblies, but I actually used 110 units of component A, well, that would basically flush out to a quantity production variance where you utilized more component than was called for in the bill of material, or was called for as well in your standard costing valuation of that assembly item. That would basically drive that variance. And then also on vice versa with your price variances, that would be driven as if you had valued a component individually different than what you had valued it at within the bill of material, or the item revision, or sorry, the cost revaluation for the assembly. So that's a whole nother topic, standard costing. If you're in average costing or LIFO, FIFO, then those are things you don't have to worry about. But in standard costing, this is kind of where the work order, the closed work order, kind of comes in to shine, is it really helps us manage those kind of variances. All right, the next step I kind of wanted to hop over to. So I showed you a little bit on the work order how we had our steps. So this is kind of the background, so to speak, of creating the routing steps that I showed you on the work order. So when you create a work order and you pick an assembly item, that assembly item is itself not only tied to a unique bill of materials per location, for example, or can be per location, it's also tied to a manufacturing routing record as well. So in this case, our assembly item for San Francisco location, it has these 4 manufacturing steps. So basically turn, mill, weld, assemble. Now these can be anything you want them to be. Like I mentioned, obviously you don't get these kind of things out of the box. You can call them whatever you want. They can be in any sequence you want, and there's no limit to how many steps you have on a routing, so to speak. Personally, I've seen routings that had hundreds and hundreds of operations within them. So you can make it as simple like this or as complicated as you want. Now, the nice thing here with the routing is it pulls a lot of things together for us to help automate the processing when you go to a work order. So when you're putting in the work order and you pick the item, that BOM comes in automatically, the routing comes in automatically, because we've kind of done a little bit of prep work ahead of time to set up all these things, so that way the end user, when they're out there on the shop floor working with that work order record, they're not having to think of these things, so to speak. So not only do we use the routing to basically define what are our operation steps, what is the sequence that they should be performed in, we're also basically tagging or associating a work center, which I'll show you here in a second, and our manufacturing cost template, and then also our time. So if a certain operation has a certain amount of setup time, meaning is there time that you need to spend before you can actually begin that operation. So, maybe you have like a CNC machine and it has to, you have to flick the power on. It takes 5 or 10 minutes to warm up to get, oil circulating, pressure built up if you're using, say, like a water jet machine, something like that. So if you have some setup time that that's going to be part of there, or mixing chemicals, etc., you can put in the setup time in addition to how many minutes in this case per unit does it take to produce or finish this step in the manufacturing routing. And then we also have some options for lag time if there's a certain amount of time that needs to pass between our operations. And then we can also tag if there's specific components per operation that we basically want to associate, meaning, hey, this assembly has a certain number of components associated to it. In this case, these 4 components. You can say, hey, before you're able to issue, say, like our SCR component here, you should be at least at step 3, right? You should not hit step 3 before issuing this component. Whereas in the other components here, I've left them blank, for example, so you can say, hey, you can issue these at any time. So you can go ahead and tie steps to a specific component on a BOM if you want to, or you can kind of leave it blank like this, where they can basically go ahead and record the issuing of components and record the time spent on different operation steps, kind of independent of each other. Perfect. So like I mentioned, the routing is kind of where we pull a lot of things together, so one of them being our work center and cost template. So let's go look at our cost template. So what our cost template helps us do is we can pull in as many cost categories. So a cost category is basically a record that we use to associate the impact of a manufacturing activity to a specific GL account. And then in addition to that, it gives us kind of a high-level grouping that we can use for reporting purposes. So, for example, in theory, you could have 50 different cost categories, but they all post to the same GL account. So when you look at your financial statement right off, at a high summary level, you wouldn't see any detail, but because you've built in all these cost categories, you can simply add the cost category to that report or have a separate report that looks at just cost category and break out all of the financials by cost category if you wanted to. So it's not like you have to create a separate GL account within your chart of accounts to capture all the different aspects, because we have this cost category that we can also report on as well. So in addition to the cost category here, we're also identifying the item as part of that cost template. So in this case, we're bringing in multiple cost categories, multiple items within a single costing template called milling. Now that doesn't mean that when we go back and associate this to the routing step I just showed you, that it's trying to pull all of these in. It's basically just looking at one of these items that's associated to that. But that way we're not having to create, cost template milling A, B, C, D, etc. You can have one cost template, so to speak, for that step or that process, and then organize all the different categories and prices and rates, etc. that fall within that. And then here we have basically different stages for how we want to capture the rate. So if it's a fixed rate, so for example, like our setup, there's a fixed cost for setup, for example, we can go ahead and populate in the fixed rate. And then if it's this is something that we're going to record time against, then we can go ahead and populate that in the run rate. And then some more, think of this as like the cost per unit, so to speak. So in this case, our unit is minute, so this would be cost per minute of time allocated um, to whatever manufacturing routing step or operation is associated to this cost template. Next, if I hop back to the routing, you'll notice that we had our work center. So our work center is basically the group of individuals or machines that are needed for this specific step or operation within the routing. So the first thing that we do is we basically create the center itself. So in this case, a group is utilized to fill in the manufacturing work center. So we basically just define what subsidiary, how many machine and labor resources are within it, our work calendar, which I'll show you here in a second, and then the specific individuals that are basically allowed to log their time within this group. So say this group or manufacturing work center was for just machines and not people. Well, someone has to be able to log time for the machine, for example. So those would be the members of your group. And then lastly, the work calendar. Here we're basically defining, how many hours per day do we want to basically say or tell the system that this specific work center can work per day. When you bring all those things together into the routing, now we have our time, or how much time is available per day, and our costing. What this allows the system to do then is very clearly define the schedule for us. So if I hop back to, say, a work order that is utilizing WIP, so you can see here we have our little WIP checkbox, which identifies this is a work in process version of a work order. And like I mentioned earlier, even with all the features turned on in this account, I can very easily still do like a basic work order and a WIP work order right on the fly if I wanted to. So it's not like you don't have access to those other records. But like I mentioned earlier, now we have specific planned start and complete times for each one of our tasks. So say, for example, I had 100 work orders in the system for different items. They all had different routing, manufacturing routing plans associated to them, and they obviously all have their own operations, their own time per operation, etc. I can utilize that to help build on my scheduling, because now I know how long each work order should take, right? If it's supposed to take 5 minutes per unit for this step on this work order, and there's 1,000 units I'm building, then I know that in total is 5,000 minutes. And then from there I know, well, these need to be completed before this step, or this step requires this work center, or i.e. person or group of people or machine. But say it has to go through the work center, and the work center represents, say, like a CNC machine. If I only have one CNC machine, it's obviously just working on one set or one task at a time, so to speak. So I can't have it work, in theory, work on multiple work orders at the same time. So in that situation, you might have plenty of people to help build the work orders, for example, but if your bottleneck is the CNC machine, you will see that in the scheduling of your work orders, because you'll see that, hey, you can't move more work orders through the flow because they all funnel or get bottlenecked through the CNC machine. So that actually elongates your schedule, elongates how long it would take you to produce items, but at the same time it can help you identify those bottlenecks so that you can kind of work towards them, or maybe move things around so that that CNC machine is working all the time and there's no delays, so to speak. So basically the takeaway here is, by having the routing and having the ability to associate time per steps on a work order or operations, not just the components being consumed in a work order, you can now also do a lot better work with scheduling, and the system can help you do the scheduling automatically because you've put in a little bit of time ahead of, or a little bit advanced effort, so to speak, to build out all your routings, how long you should think it should take per step. And then from there, NetSuite has everything it needs to go ahead and calculate out. So as work orders come in, it knows exactly which routing to do, how long that takes, and then it can help you with your scheduling. All right, perfect. So the next thing, let me just hop through my tabs here. So the next area that we're going to hop into is advanced manufacturing. So advanced manufacturing takes a lot of the tools that we had in the WIP and routing level or module of manufacturing and kind of takes it even further. So one area that was, very clear to identify with this was the work center. So it's kind of a natural transition so that you can kind of see the added level of features, so to speak. So as you can see here on this screen, with the WIP version of manufacturing, we had a work calendar, so we could identify the time that this group or that this team of people, for example, work center, can basically produce an item and what days. But you'll notice here I can't define a separate time per day. I'm basically just saying, well, they work from 7 a.m. for 9 hours a day for these days, and so it's not extremely flexible, so to speak. When we hop into the advanced manufacturing work center, you'll notice that one, it has its own single record to manage any specific assets that need to be associated to the work center. It also has the calendar, so you're not using separate area to manage your work center and the calendar, for instance. And then here you'll notice that we can control our time and our time per day on a per day basis. So you can see here that we've actually got our 7 days of the week. We've defined our time for this specific SO assembly work center, and we can actually associate multiple calendars as well. So for example, if I knew that there was going to be, say, like a holiday season, any of you watching this that have manufacturing in China, which I'm sure a lot of us do, I certainly do. We have the Chinese New Year, and usually our facilities are shut down for 3 or 4 weeks, even sometimes longer, depending on, our Shenzhen facility usually takes about 3 or 4 weeks off. So anywho, to circle back, what this allows me to do is say, well, I can build in my regular calendar, so for the majority of the year, I can say use my standard assembly calendar, for example. But then for the holidays, or for that Chinese New Year, I can have a separate calendar, and with its own availabilities per day and its own effective date range, so that I can say, for this time frame, there's extremely limited availability. But then outside of that, it switches back to another calendar or to the normal calendar, for example. So that way NetSuite can handle that scheduling automatically. Because obviously I know, or hopefully I know well in advance when those holidays or downtimes are going to be, for example. So I can build those in advance. And then if I have a series of work orders that are going to take 6 or 8 months, it will incorporate that time automatically, right? So it's not going to assume regular availability and then hit that time frame and keep assuming regular availability. Because you've built in that other calendar ahead of time, you can use that as part of your automated scheduling as well. So very, very neat tool. And then this is also where we manage, how many machines, how many people are basically part of this work center, similar to what we did on our group, which we're using as a work center. Nice thing with advanced manufacturing is it kind of just brings it all together onto one record. And then again, like I mentioned, kind of adds in and adds an extra level of availability of features, so to speak. The next thing I want to touch on with advanced manufacturing is we also have out-of-the-box reason codes that we can define. So earlier with the WIP, I was mentioning how you can record scrap, for example. And the way you would record the scrap is basically by adjusting the quantity. So in the example I gave earlier, if I needed 100 components, but I accidentally used 110, maybe I dropped something on the floor, it broke, bad quality, whatever, um, I basically just put in my component usage as being 110. So I'm financially accounting for the scrap, quantity-wise accounting for the scrap, but I don't have a way to account for the reason for the scrap, so to speak. Same thing with downtime. As I'm recording my time from my WIP and routing version of the work order, if the BOM says or the routing says that it should take 10 minutes for this step per unit, but I took 15 minutes to do that step, I can record the time so it accounts for it, it appropriates the cost for that extra time, etc. But I don't have a way to record the reason, right, behind that extra time. So with advanced manufacturing, we have the ability to build in several lists to help us kind of capture those things. So here we have our downtime reason list. And when I'll show you here in a second, there is also like a tablet and scanner UI with advanced manufacturing as well, which the other versions don't have. So that's why we have basically a scanner code so that the user can obviously pick it from a drop-down list in the tablet UI, which I'll show you here in a second. But if you have kind of like, say, barcodes that are next to your workstation that represent these different reasons, you can use a scanner code so that you're not having to pick it from a list or type it in. You can just scan it, especially if the user's on the floor. Everything they do is scanned. Might as well just throw this in there too, and then they're pretty well used to it. So. And then the next one is we have the same kind of concept, our list for material loss reasons that we can use to record. And again, these can be whatever you want them to be. So I just pulled up a list of kind of generalistic kind of material loss reasons. But again, we custom build these reasons specific to each account. So these would be coded and named to be whatever you want them to be for your specific account. And then lastly, labor codes with all of our rates as well associated to each labor code. So earlier when I showed you manufacturing routing the cost template, we were able to define our rates per cost category. So we still have cost categories in advanced manufacturing, but the nice thing with this is it kind of, like I said, adds in an extra level of features or capabilities where now we can have a scannable action, so scanner code. We can have specific rates per people of a different skill level. So before we were basically saying, okay, well, everyone within this work center is at this rate. What this does is it allows you to say, well, yes, that manufacturing routing for that item, that assembly item, has utilizing, work center called, say, operators. But within that operator group, depending upon the labor code or, specific task they're doing, or even the specific person within that group, they can have a different rate. So it just kind of takes what's already there and then again adds in a lot of extra capabilities and flexibilities without having to create, duplicate work centers, so to speak, for your different rates. And then the next record within advanced manufacturing is called the Workbench. So the Workbench is the equivalent of every step or operation that was in manufacturing routing. So for example, if I hop back to our manufacturing routing here, a workbench in advanced manufacturing is the same as every one of these operations within the routing. So for example, here I have the operation for weld, for example, and I can say, hey, this weld operation is for this team, so my spot welders. It utilizes my welding cost template that has all my costs in it, and it should take this amount of time. So pretty straightforward. What advanced manufacturing allows you to do with the Workbench is add in an incredible amount of more detail to that operation. So we still have here, what is the routing that this Workbench is associated to? What's the item? What's its sequence? What's the name of the operation, work center, etc. And then we can give a name to the workbench. So all of these header fields are the same kind of things that we would have saw on the routing, but now we have a lot more flexibility per operation to define our rates, to define any lead times, lag times, offsets. We now have the ability to define batching. So is there a minimum or maximum batch, any incremental quantities? We can also define if there's any assets that we need to include as part of this, any specific labor requirements, any specific work instructions, so we can very clearly document, hey, when you're in this operation, this is exactly how you should be doing it, even almost say like sub-sequences within it. So you can see here that my operation was operation 10 as far as my routing, but within that I have my 10.1, 10.2, which are the specific steps within, we'll say, this process or operation to accomplish it. We can also attach in any documents, things of the nature. If you have, CAD drawings, PDFs, JPEGs you want to attach, etc., we can include any of those and then bring them in to the tablet interface, or if they're just, say, here on like the regular desktop interface, so that way they know exactly what they need to do within this operation, to basically finish it out. So, say you had a really simple manufacturing process. It was, most of your products came in ready-made. It was just take this steel, cut it, weld it into this joint, paint it, and then package it. Super simple. Or maybe just like repackage a product that came in or something like that. In that kind of a scenario, then just regular manufacturing routing would be more than adequate. Your steps are not so complicated that you can't just describe what should be done right in the name of the operation itself. Now, if you have something that's like we're going to produce a car or a piece of tractor equipment or something like that that's more complicated, and the operation isn't, weld this piece to this piece or paint to this piece, it's, assemble an engine. So the operation or the manufacturing routing for the assembly, in this case, which is a car, for example, would be like chassis, engine, electrical, dash, finish work, painting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So your operations are more high level. And then within the operation, if you're building an engine, for example, there could be hundreds of steps within the one operation called build an engine. So it just allows you kind of that greater flexibility without having to make the routing itself super complex. And then in addition to that, we can also set if there's any material outputs, again, files like I mentioned. Again, don't get super tied down with all the fields and tabs, etc. All of this can be kind of customized to call in whatever you need. Really the main point I want to kind of get across here is that the advanced manufacturing just kind of takes what we had in with the WIP version and then adds in even more capabilities. But you're not getting rid of the WIP and routing. We still have the WIP and routing, as you can see here. We're just kind of taking that operation, which is pretty straightforward in the manufacturing routing setup, and takes it to like a whole nother level. Perfect. All right, so now that we've got kind of all of our workbenches set up, our manufacturing routing set up, we've got work orders in the system. Now we can utilize one of the tools that comes with advanced manufacturing is the ability to help us manage capacity planning. So here we can define a location. I just defined a small little time frame here, my time fence that I'm looking for work orders. And then this will help me kind of build out my schedule based off of everything that's in there. I can check if there's any resource constraints. Whoops, picked too many. So I can see under my resource supply, like what am I going to need as far as work centers to accomplish any of this, the number of people, labor ship headcounts. So the nice thing with this is it really helps you kind of look at everything at a high level and then kind of help you plan things out. And then we can also save this plan. We can incorporate in planned demand as well, which is part of the demand planning module in NetSuite, but that's more inventory management, not really manufacturing related, so that's why I'm not going to go into super deep detail here. But if you have seen the demand planning module, just kind of keep that in mind that we can kind of piggyback that off into here as well if we want to. And then next, we have the ability to basically release work orders based off of a schedule. So we use all of our routing, the times and everything we defined in the routing, our workbenches, and the plans we've created for resource planning. And now we can take all that and bring it together. And then we can now use that to help us organize and release work orders to the shop floor. We can even define our sequence, obviously. So we can do batches. We don't have to do them one by one. You could do a whole batch of 1,000 if you wanted to, and then sequence them out. So very, very helpful to kind of help you organize and then release things based off of whatever kind of plan or schedule you wanted to do. And then lastly, or so not lastly, I got lots of tabs. Next, we have our work order management tool. Again, another tool that advanced manufacturing kind of offers or rolls out as part of that module. So here we're able to kind of define what are the work orders we want to see by using our header filters here. And then we can select off which are the work orders that we want to review. And then based off of the ones you select, we can then review at a high level the operations, any material requirements. If there's any associated work orders, we'd be able to see those under related work orders. So an example of that would be on the work order itself, if I'm building, say, a finished good assembly or a high-level parent assembly, and then there is a sub-assembly item or multiple sub-assembly levels, for example, related to that item, on the work order, I can actually say, when I produce this finished assembly item, automatically generate the work order for all of the sub-assemblies that I don't have in inventory, for example, or just automatically generate a work order for the sub-assembly if you're in more of a manufacture to order or produce to order kind of a thing, kind of a setup rather than a manufacture to stock or produce to stock kind of an environment. So that's basically, to circle back around, where the related work orders would come in. If the work order I had selected to review had any of those kind of scenarios in it, I would be able to see, oh, well, this work order is for a parent assembly, and it has these kind of sub-assembly work orders also tied to it. Once you start working on the work order, you can come back and see any production results, production losses, equipment downtime, labor charges, etc. In this case, I picked a work order that hasn't been built yet, so I can kind of see these things ahead of time. But it's a really great tool to help you manage work orders at a high level, right? So in this case, to keep it simple, I just picked one work order, but I could select off, the whole list if I wanted to, and then refresh this, and then view the operations, material requirements, etc. for multiple work orders all in one shot. So let me click. Hopefully it won't time out on me. I think it did time out on me. But anywho, to kind of circle back around, the idea with this is it helps you kind of manage multiple work orders. Rather than having to dive down into the details of each individual work order, you can kind of look at them at using this tool as kind of like a high summary level, manage your calendar, for example, of the work orders, when they're going to be produced, which work order happens on which day, how many hours you think it's going to take, etc. So this is just a really good tool to kind of help you manage the work orders that are currently in the system, whether they've been completed or not. Again, it's just a good kind of management tool for work orders. Now, you can always dive down into the work order individual if you want to and get that. You can certainly run reports to get pretty much all of this information anyway. So the benefit of this tool is it kind of brings it all into one place. So even with, say, like the WIP version of manufacturing, even if you didn't have advanced manufacturing, you could still get this information It it would just be we'd have to build the reports, so you'd have to build the reports to capture these different elements, um, and then you'd have essentially standalone reports for a lot of these different pieces, rather than just one tool that kind of pulls them all together. All right, perfect. So the next thing I want to look at is actually our traveler. So in NetSuite, if I can grab the right tab, there we go. So if you're in a manufacturing environment and you even know what a traveler is, this should be pretty straightforward. But the concept of a traveler is that it has all of your scannable actions on it, right? So if 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 I am printing a piece of paper, basically, to follow the manufacturer of a work order through the floor, but at the same time, I also have people with scanning devices that do not want to obviously manually select from a list as they're working through the work order. The Traveler is a really great tool because not only can you see that on the tablet or on the scanner gun, I guess depending on what type of scanner gun you have, you can see all that information digitally within the system. The Traveler gives you kind of like a hard copy as well, and then we can throw all the barcodes for our steps, for all of the bill of materials or components that we need. So that way all of the scannable actions or items are on the Traveler. So not only can you look at this and get a lot of the information you need to complete the work order off of this, if you're using a scanning device, you can also use this to make your life a heck of a lot simpler as well, because everything you would need to do to scan operations or scan the components, etc., is sitting right here on this Traveler. So out of the box, this is pretty much what the Traveler looks like. Now again, anything, pretty much a lot of things within NetSuite can be customized, including this PDF. So if you wanted to change the fonts, change the size of the barcodes, add in more barcodes, remove barcodes, add or reduce the information, etc., this can be customized to pull in pretty much anything you want. So if the information lives on the work order, lives on any of the associated records of a work order, it can basically be pulled in and represented however you want onto this Traveler. But out of the box, that's pretty much what the Traveler looks like. And in say 80 to 90% of cases, we're only making slight tweaks on this to add in more things. Maybe they don't need the time on there, etc., etc. Or reducing it. For example, maybe they don't want people to be able to scan in the steps. They want them to do the steps, let's say like a separate workstation on the floor. So in this case, we're really just using the Traveler to be like our scannable components, and then they would almost use this as like a picking ticket almost. Now you can print picking tickets separate just for work orders, right? So if you're going to go do picking to grab the components of a work order, you can do that too. But in some situations, if the Traveler's already got that info already on here, throwing in the bin that they should go pick from and the bin's barcode is usually pretty straightforward as well. So then they're kind of like repurposing this document to accomplish, the same thing as maybe 2 or 3 other PDFs. They're just kind of pulling everything in onto this one file. So again, pretty cool. Just want to make sure you're aware this is available. Both the advanced manufacturing and WIP versions have a concept of a Traveler like this. So both of those can utilize this. Perfect. All right, and the last thing I kind of want to cover, I keep saying that. Next thing I want to cover in today's session, advanced manufacturing has the tablet UI, which I mentioned earlier. So let's hop over to that. So I've resized this screen in Firefox to basically look or be the dimensions of, in this case, an iPad. But depending upon the device, it'll look a little bit different, but mostly just because it's trying to squeeze in the columns, things of that nature, to fit the display size. So obviously, if you're trying to run this on, say, something like a smaller screen, like a 5-inch screen tablet or something like that, it's going to be a little bit more squished. The font size will be smaller, etc. But for the purpose of this demo, it kind of works out just fine to do something like an iPad or a tablet size, for example. Just like with everything in NetSuite I mentioned earlier, this interface, the tablet UI, can also be customized. So we can bring in whatever columns, whatever information that you need to see. The idea with the tablet is everything is touch, right? So obviously if you're using a tablet, the screen is going to be a touch screen. So there is no mouse type interface the um, with the tablet UI. It is all kind of touch. So you'll notice that things that are normally like right click here, open a new tab, etc. Those kind of things don't exist because again we're working with like a tablet UI. So in this case I just picked a quick little start and end date. From here the user can manage their listing of work orders that are currently in the queue that they need to work on. And if you have multiple tablet interfaces, we have the ability to define specific lists for each tablet. So say, for example, I had a tablet that was just for my welders, a tablet just for my painters, a tablet just for my pickers even. You could have completely different lists that show up on each one of those tablet UIs individually to accomplish whatever their specific task was. So it's not like everyone has to be dumped into the same UI, so to speak. It is tied to the user's login credentials, so that way when they log in, say first thing when they come in, they're seeing just the things that they need to see based off of whatever rules that you've defined for them. From here, we can then dive down into a work order, so I'll just grab this one real quick. And then you can see here a lot of the information that we had on our work order as far as like the scrap or downtime, material issues that we talked about before are all recorded on here. And then it's very much a kind of like touch interface like I mentioned. So here we have our start button. That basically begins the work order, and then it'll just basically track the time, track the, how many did they produce, how many how many components did they issue, if there was any scrap, the reason for it, if there was any downtime, the reason for it, and that way everything that they need to do. So imagine you're the user out on the floor. You don't need all that detail that was in the manufacturing routing and any of the advanced manufacturing records in the WIP version of the work order. You're just the guy on the floor going and fetching stuff, putting things together, and you need to record that you finished this step, in like 5 seconds. So that is the entire idea behind this tablet interface, is to cut out all the noise, so to speak, or things that are not relevant to the user that's doing this action. And they can just very simply put in, I produced 5, I pulled in these components, here's the reasons if I had any scrap or downtime, done, and keep moving forward. So it's just, like I mentioned, all a touch interface, and then when they're all done, they've recorded, they hit stop, and then that automatically records their start and end time. So then they're not having to record their time manually. It's smart enough to realize that when they hit start and stop, what the time difference was. And then once they do all this, while they're interacting with the UI, the nice thing about NetSuite is everything is live, meaning literally as they're putting things in through the tablet UI, your full desktop UI is being updated all the time. So, they could come in here and, put in something, hit stop, and you literally hit refresh at the same time within, say, on that work order in the desktop UI, and it's going to reflect what they put in. So there isn't like any, it holds in a queue for 5 minutes and backflushes to the system or something like that. It's all the same system. It's all live, being updated immediately all the time. So you'll never have any of those kind of like sync issues or something like that. Perfect. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about now with advanced manufacturing is, as you can imagine, there is a tremendous amount of manufacturing reports that come with advanced manufacturing. So I'm not going to go over all the reports today, but I will go over a lot of them, most of them. But real quickly, so when you have advanced manufacturing, we basically have a separate section of reports just for advanced manufacturing around, say, complexity planning reports, any of our other planning reports, so material shortages, work orders, material issue, daily plan, etc. We have our manufacturing reports for production loss, etc., etc. So I'll go ahead and kind of walk through some of these. So here we have our material shortage report. So it'll kind of show us over time if we're going to have any items short, what work order it's going to be short for, what the status of the work order for, what our production start time is. And one thing to point out is you'll notice on pretty much all of these reports, you have the ability to dive down in. So right from here, I see this, I can dive down in and open up that work order in a new tab, a new window, dive right to it directly if I wanted to. So it's not like you have to go look this up. All of these are linkable, so you can just hop right down into it. And again, I guess one thing I should mention too is with all of the reports I'm about to show you, these are just what the reports look like out of the box. All of them have the ability to be customized so that even individual users can have their own offshoot versions of this report. So you can start with, say, this material shortage report and then customize it to fit in whatever your specific needs are. So maybe here, when I look at the summary level and then I hop down to, oops, of course it timed out on me. And then I hop down to, so like the detail level, maybe I want to bring more of the detail up to the summary level or vice versa, add more to the detail level. You can pull in, whatever information that you need. Perfect. So here's our work order report. Pretty straightforward. It's just our production time frames, our work order. You can have work orders that are created from sales orders tied to a specific customer. What the item is we're producing, how many we're planning to produce. So again, just a nice high-level report to kind of give you timing of when things are going to be ready, so to speak. We have our fund material issue report. Same kind of concept. We have here, we're looking at the items that we're going to be pulling for our work orders. So the first one here was, these are the items we're producing. The material issue is these are the items that are going to need to be pulled for work orders. Again, this can be resorted, grouped. The whole report can be completely customized to fit whatever your needs are. Next, we have our work order production results. So here we can see, all of our work orders that are currently in a planned or being worked on status. When the last time they were updated basically by a user, whether it's desktop UI, tablet UI, percentage complete, kind of where they are in the production process. If they're complete, you'll notice they'll get highlighted in green. But again, this can be customized. We can build in other highlighting rules. So for example, if a work order is still open and it's late, so it's past its production end date, we can highlight it orange or red or do whatever, right? Send alerts to people. So there's a lot of capabilities in NetSuite to send alerts, put things on people's dashboards, reminders, all kinds of things. So very flexible. We have our daily plan. Very common. I'll run my daily plan and either pull this into Excel or print it out. I have seen some cases too where like a floor will have, say, like a projector that projects up on one of the empty walls. And the computer that's hooked up to the projector, for example, is logged into NetSuite, and then the browser is just set to refresh like every 60 seconds or something, and you'll have this daily plan or even another report if you want to. So say like shipping, it's a list of orders that need to be shipped. They're sorted by like high priority to low priority. You can do the same kind of thing here with this as well, or any other report, so that way people kind of know what's going on, even if they're not NetSuite users, so to speak. So, or you can always pull this out, print it, just review it. And again, like I mentioned, with all the other reports, this can be customized. So if there's things on here you're like, that don't really need that for my purposes, or I want to bring in something else, resort things, group things, etc. Perfect. Next, we have our operations scorecard. This kind of has some native highlighting built into it to kind of let you know where things are at or call attention to certain operations that have gone like out of bounds, for example. So here I have my highlighting. So in this example, pink is start date is before today and the status is not started, meaning it's basically late. So that specific step, so not that work order as a whole, but that specific step within the work order is late. So you can see here, for example, like work order 601, it's so late that all of the steps within the work order are now late. But you can see here, work order 603, only the first two operations are late. The last one actually is not late yet because its time frame pushes out past today. And then again, green, completed, yellow is in progress, and the little flag means it hasn't been started yet. So in this case, I don't think for this time frame I had any that have been completed yet. But again, it's just a nice little out-of-the-box report, and then we can customize this, change the highlighting rules, change any of the information, criteria, etc. that you want in here. The idea with all of these standard reports is that way you're not having to build every report from scratch. You can start out with a report that's 80%, 90% of the way there, and then tweak it to fit whatever your needs are, right? So that way you have enough reports where some of them have kind of similar information to each other, but from a little bit different perspective, so to speak. So you can start with the one that's closest to what your end goal is, and then go from there. So next one is we have a couple of different graphs. So if you wanted to have more of a visual representation rather than kind of like a report representation, we have one for downtime, we have one for production loss. Again, these can be customized, to be whatever you want. So maybe I want to repurpose my production loss graph report to be, component usage or something like that are late or whatever. But I want it to be more like a visual or something like that, or planned production results, etc. So you could take this and simply because it's basically delivering a graph result, completely customize it to be something completely different. So it's not like you have to stay within the realm of what it's calling for. So next one, we have a nice report for labor, number of labor hours, resources, operation, labor code, like I mentioned earlier, what assembly and work order those are tied to, etc. And then lastly, an operations or an operating report for our work order, so we can see the item we're producing, the amount of time, runtime, quantity being produced, quantity being scrapped, scrap percentage versus quantity produced. So nice kind of like overall view of the health of our work orders that are in the system, so to speak. Again, if I wanted to get a report that says show me, work orders that are in process where we're having issues, where I might be short on components or I'm running out of time or running over time in my operation steps and things are kind of slipping as far as time frame, I can use those reports. If I wanted more like a high-level summary of, well, how did my work orders do, I have this report and a couple of other reports looking different perspectives. So the idea is, if you're going to pay the money to buy this advanced manufacturing module, it might as well have a whole bunch of reports that come with it that pretty much most clients are using most of these reports, and certainly customizing them a little bit to fit whatever their specific needs are. So, well, hopefully this has kind of helped you today get a feel for the differences between NetSuite's 4 different kind of manufacturing modules or levels of manufacturing. Like I mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of flexibility around the design, the layouts, even how some of the things operate. And again, as you transition or upgrade through the modules, you don't lose any of the previous features, right? So even with all this advanced manufacturing, if I needed to just crank out an assembly build in 20 seconds to build 3 units or something like that, and I didn't want to go through all of these other steps for recording times or operations or building capacity plans. I built it. I know I built it. I just need to record that I built it. You can always just hop back and crank out an assembly build in 10, 20 seconds and keep moving forward. So it's not like if you went all the way to the extreme as far as functionality that you can't still go down to the super simple. But on the same token, you don't want to buy advanced manufacturing like the full Ferrari of manufacturing in NetSuite, for example, when you're just going to eat groceries. you just need like the work order or whip version of the work order, or even just the assembly build. So hopefully today's sessions kind of helped identify the major functionality pieces for each one of those different modules. So that way, if you're kind of considering which one to use, hopefully this helps you get a little bit more direction. And of course, if you need a specific demo, want to learn more information about each one of these, or if you're currently using one of these modules and you want some more help around working with it or have questions about it, of course, us here at Concentrus are more than happy to help you. So just give us a jingle and we can go from there. Anyway, thank you today for your time. I know it's been a little bit over an hour, so thank you again for your time watching this video, and I hope you have a great day.